She thought you were replaceable, not because she said it, not because she even consciously believed it, but because the pattern, the way she moved, the way she tested, the way she kept one foot out the door while you kept both feet in, told the story clearly enough. She thought that what you brought to her life was common, that the specific warmth, the consistency, the genuine investment you showed up with every single day was the kind of thing she could find again, easily, quickly, without much effort. She thought you were one of many, and then the replacement arrived, and something happened that she did not expect. And this video is about what that something was, what it reveals about human psychology, and most importantly, what it means for the man who is sitting with the specific, complicated feeling of watching someone discover too late what they actually had. Like and subscribe to Stoic Blessing. We show up every week for the man doing the hard work. Let's get into it. The first thing to understand is why people undervalue what they have while they have it. Because this is not a personal failing specific to her, and understanding the mechanism is the first step to being free from the story that her undervaluation tells about your worth. Human beings are wired, at a level that has nothing to do with intelligence or character, to adapt to what is consistently present. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. The Stoics called it the failure of attention. Whatever is reliable, whatever is always there, whatever can be counted on, the mind stops registering it as valuable because the mind reserves its attention for what is new, uncertain, or at risk of being lost. This is why the person who shows up consistently, who is genuinely dependable, who loves without the drama of unpredictable availability, that person is almost always undervalued by someone who has not yet done the inner work of learning to recognize real quality when it is in front of them rather than after it is gone. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this failure of attention with the kind of honesty that only comes from having caught yourself in it. He wrote about the tendency of the human mind to take for granted the things that are most worth having, genuine friendship, the present moment itself, precisely because their consistency makes them invisible. The person whose love was consistent, whose presence was reliable, whose investment was genuine, that person becomes part of the furniture of the life they are in, not because they are ordinary, because ordinary is what we call things that are always there, and it is only in their absence that the mind finally, belatedly, with the specific clarity that loss provides, registers what it actually was. She thought another man would replace you easily. She thought what you brought was common. The replacement is in the process of teaching her that it was not. Comment below, I was never ordinary, if you're done letting someone's failure to see you clearly change how you see yourself. Here is the psychological mechanism that is now unfolding on her side. And understanding it is not about satisfaction or revenge, it is about clarity. When someone leaves a genuine connection because they have undervalued it, and then attempts to recreate what they had with someone new, they encounter what psychology calls the contrast effect. The contrast effect is simple and brutal in its operation. Once you have experienced something real, everything that falls short of it is immediately and viscerally recognizable as falling short. You do not need a side-by-side comparison. Your nervous system already has the template, the warmth that was genuine versus the warmth that is performed, the consistency that came from character versus the consistency that is being maintained because the relationship is still new, the specific quality of being truly known by someone versus the surface-level presentation of two people who are still in the process of constructing impressions of each other. The new person is not you, not because you are objectively superior in every measurable dimension, because they are not the person who knew her in the specific, accumulated, unrepeatable way that real time and real investment produces. Seneca wrote about the difference between connection that is built and connection that is merely encountered, between the depth that comes from genuine shared history and the novelty that comes from new attention. The replacement offers novelty. Novelty is real. It is genuinely pleasurable in the short term, but novelty is not depth. And the human heart, once it has experienced depth, does not confuse the two for long. She is in the process of discovering this. Not necessarily in a way that produces action. Not necessarily in a way that brings her back, but in the quiet, persistent, unavoidable way that reality always eventually makes itself felt. The specific growing recognition that what she thought was common was actually rare. Comment below, real depth can't be replaced, if you know the difference between what you offered and what most people are offering. Now here is the Stoic demand, the one that separates the man who grows from this from the man who merely survives it. You cannot organize your inner life around her eventual realization. You cannot make her recognition of what she lost the destination you are building toward. You cannot let the hope that she will come back be the engine driving your growth, because if it is, the growth is not real. It is performance. And performance, however convincing, collapses the moment the audience it was designed for stops watching. The Stoic truth is this: the work you do on yourself in this period has to be for you. Not for the version of events where she returns and finds someone better. For the actual daily, lived reality of your own life and who you are becoming in it. Because that man, the man built by genuine self-investment rather than by the hope of being seen, is the man who cannot be put in this position again. Not because he becomes invulnerable, because he becomes genuinely self-sufficient. Epictetus drew the clearest possible line between the two motivations. The man who improves himself to produce a specific response in another person has placed his growth in the same external, uncontrollable category as every other thing he has been trying to manage: her feelings, her choices, her eventual realization. He is still, despite all the discipline and all the work, organized around her. The man who improves himself because the quality of his character is the only thing he has ever genuinely owned. That man is free. His growth does not depend on her noticing it. His worth does not depend on her eventually confirming it. His life does not hinge on whether the realization arrives or what she does with it when it does. He is building for himself, in the truest and most liberating sense of that phrase. And that freedom, the specific, earned, unshakable freedom of a man whose sense of himself does not require external validation to remain intact, is the actual prize this entire experience is capable of producing. Comment below, I build for me, if your growth stopped being about her the moment you read that. Let's talk about what genuine irreplaceability actually is, because it is almost never what people think it is, and the misunderstanding of it leads men to draw the wrong lessons from experiences like this one. Irreplaceability is not about being the most attractive, the most successful, the most impressive version of yourself. It is not about optimizing your external presentation to the point where no reasonable person could look elsewhere. That kind of irreplaceability is fragile because it is always relative. There will always be someone more attractive, more successful, more impressive in some specific dimension. The irreplaceability the Stoics were pointing toward is of a completely different nature. It is the irreplaceability of genuine character, of the specific, accumulated, deeply personal quality of a man who knows himself, lives by his values, and brings to every relationship the specific and unrepeatable combination of who he actually is. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the man of genuine virtue does not need to compare himself to others because his worth is not located in the comparison. It is located in the quality of his character, in whether he is honest, whether he is courageous, whether he treats people well, whether he keeps his promises, whether he shows up as himself rather than as a performance designed to produce approval. That man is irreplaceable, not because no one else exists, but because no one else is him. The combination of his specific values, his specific way of seeing the world, his specific history and growth and daily practice of becoming, that combination is singular. It cannot be found in the next person she tries. It cannot be approximated by someone new. It is his. And the man who knows that, who has built that knowledge through genuine self-investment rather than through external validation, moves through the world with a quality of presence that is immediately felt by everyone he encounters, including, eventually, the people who underestimated it. Comment below, "I am irreplaceable," if you've finally understood that your value was never in the comparison. Here is the part of this experience that nobody wants to sit with honestly, because it requires looking at something uncomfortable about the dynamic that existed before the ending. The reason she thought you were replaceable was partly, not entirely, but partly, because of something that was happening inside the dynamic that is worth examining with the specific, courageous honesty the Stoics demanded of themselves. When a man overinvests, over-accommodates, and overgives in a relationship without his investment being genuinely met, when he absorbs the imbalance, rationalizes the inconsistency, and continues to show up fully for a connection that is not showing up fully for him, he inadvertently communicates something to the person on the other side, not through his words, through the structure of his behavior. He communicates that his presence is unconditional, that his investment does not require reciprocity to continue, that the relationship can be as one-sided as it needs to be without consequence. And unconditional presence, however it is intended, is almost never valued at its actual worth. Because value, in the psychology of human attachment, is partly a function of scarcity. And a man who is always available, always accommodating, always willing to absorb the imbalance, that man, however extraordinary he actually is, has made himself feel common through his unconditional presence. This is not a blame statement. It is a diagnostic one. The Stoics were not interested in assigning fault. They were interested in understanding clearly so that the same errors could be avoided in the future. The specific error here is the one Seneca warned about most directly, the error of giving your most valuable things, your time, your energy, your genuine care and investment, without any relationship to whether those things are being genuinely received and reciprocated, not as a transaction, not as a coldly calculated exchange, but as the natural expression of a man who has standards, who gives generously within connections that genuinely meet his standards and walks away from connections that consistently do not. That man does not get taken for granted, not because he is withholding, because what he offers is only available in the context of genuine reciprocity. And the rarity that creates the specific, felt quality of something that is only accessible under the right conditions is what produces genuine valuation rather than comfortable reliance. Comment below, "I give where it's received," if you've learned the difference between generosity and self-abandonment. There is a specific temptation in this situation that needs to be addressed directly and honestly. The temptation to wait. To hold yourself in a kind of suspended readiness for the moment when the realization lands fully and she comes back. To build your life with one eye always on the door she left through in case it opens again. This temptation is understandable. It is also one of the most quietly destructive things you can do to yourself in this period. Because waiting, even disciplined, productive-looking waiting, is organized around her timeline rather than your own. It makes her potential return the context in which your life is being lived, rather than a possible future event that your life will accommodate if and when it arrives. And a life lived in that context is not a fully lived life. It is a rehearsal, a holding pattern, a version of yourself that is being performed for an audience that may or may not ever show up. The Stoic prescription is not to close the door against her return. It is to genuinely stop thinking about the door. To build a life so fully and so deliberately your own that the question of whether she comes back becomes genuinely secondary to the question of whether the life you are building is the one you actually want to be living. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the practice of confining yourself to the present, not as a spiritual exercise in mindfulness, but as a practical act of self-governance. The present is where your choices are made, where your character is built, where your life is either lived or deferred. The man who is genuinely present, who is investing fully in today rather than holding something in reserve for a possible future, is the man who, paradoxically, becomes most worth returning to. Not because he is performing unavailability, because he is actually genuinely fully elsewhere, in his own life, building his own thing, becoming his own man. And that quality, the specific, unmistakable quality of a person who is completely absorbed in their own becoming, is one of the most compelling things a human being can project. Comment below, "I'm too busy becoming to wait," if you've decided your life is too important to put on hold for someone who hasn't decided to be in it. Here is the honest Stoic accounting of what the replacement is currently experiencing. Not to produce satisfaction, but because honesty about this dynamic is part of what sets you free from it. The new relationship has a ceiling, not because the new person is bad or wrong or unworthy of her, because the specific ceiling of any relationship, built on the rebound from undervaluation, is determined by what the person is running toward rather than what they genuinely chose. She did not choose the replacement from a place of fullness and clarity. She chose them from a place of avoidance and urgency, from the specific emotional state of someone who has ended something significant and reached immediately for relief rather than sitting with what the ending required her to feel. That is the foundation the new relationship is built on, and foundations determine ceilings. The relationship built on genuine, clear-eyed, fully processed choice has a different ceiling than the one built on the urgent need to not feel alone. This is not wishful thinking. This is the straightforward psychology of attachment and choice operating in the way it always operates. The Stoics would not ask you to take satisfaction from this. They would ask you to use it as information, specifically as confirmation that what happened was never a verdict on your worth. It was a moment in her development that she was not yet ready to handle differently. And moments in people's development are not measures of the people who were present for them. They are measures of where that person was in their own growth at that particular time. You were not too much or too little. You were genuine in a moment when genuine was not yet what she knew how to receive. That is painful. It is also not personal. And the man who can hold that distinction, who can feel the pain without accepting the verdict, is a man who is free to bring his full, genuine, unguarded self to the next connection without the defensive modifications that bitterness produces. Comment below, her timing, not my truth, if you've stopped letting her developmental chapter write a permanent story about your worth. Let's talk about what you build in this period. Not to attract her back, not to prove anything to anyone.